Some people lock their doors not because they fear others, but because silence is the only place where they can finally hear themselves. For certain people, home is far more than walls, furniture, or decoration. It is not simply the location where they sleep at night or eat their meals. Their home becomes an emotional refuge, a private territory where they can finally lower the weight they carry throughout the outside world. Every day, people step into environments that demand something from them. Work asks for productivity. Society asks for politeness. Relationships ask for emotional availability. Even casual interactions often require masks, controlled emotions, and carefully measured reactions. After hours of carrying those invisible responsibilities, some individuals return home, not searching for entertainment or stimulation, but searching for relief. Their home becomes the only place where they can exist without performance. These people are often misunderstood because others assume solitude means sadness. But solitude and loneliness are not the same experience. Loneliness is the pain of feeling emotionally disconnected, while solitude can become a deep form of emotional restoration. For someone who values peace intensely, the silence inside their home feels comforting in the same way darkness comforts tired eyes after staring at bright lights all day. The absence of pressure allows their nervous system to finally slow down. They do not need to explain their mood. They do not need to monitor every word they say. They do not need to smile when they are exhausted or pretend interest when their energy is fading. In that private environment, they regain contact with themselves. When unexpected visitors arrive, even if those visitors have good intentions, the emotional atmosphere shifts immediately. The energy of the house changes. The person who once felt calm suddenly becomes alert. Their mind begins calculating responsibilities automatically. Is the house clean enough? Is the guest comfortable? What should they serve? How long will the conversation last? Will silence become awkward? Will they be expected to entertain, advise, listen, or emotionally engage for hours? These thoughts may appear small to highly social individuals, but for emotionally sensitive people, the mental weight becomes enormous. What others experience as casual interaction can feel like emotional labor. Many of these individuals are deeply observant by nature. They notice subtle emotional changes in others constantly. They pay attention to tone of voice, body language, pauses in conversation, hidden tension, and unspoken expectations. Because their awareness remains highly active during social situations, they rarely feel mentally relaxed around visitors, even when they genuinely care about them. Their brain continues working the entire time, processing emotions, reading signals, and managing the atmosphere. This is why social interaction can leave them drained instead of energized. The exhaustion does not come from hatred toward people. It comes from the continuous emotional processing happening beneath the surface. Their attachment to personal space also grows stronger because the outside world often feels chaotic and invasive. Modern life rarely gives people true silence anymore. Phones ring constantly. Notifications interrupt every quiet moment. Social media creates endless comparison, pressure, and noise. Conversations become rushed. Schedules become crowded. In the middle of all that overstimulation, home becomes the only environment they can control completely. They choose the lighting, the silence, the rhythm, the atmosphere, and the emotional temperature of the space. That control gives them psychological safety. This is why frequent visitors can feel emotionally disruptive even when no conflict exists. The presence of another person changes the emotional structure of the environment. Suddenly, the sanctuary no longer feels entirely theirs. Their routines shift. Their mental stillness disappears. Their private emotional rhythm becomes interrupted by another person's energy, habits, opinions, and expectations. Some people adapt to this easily, but others feel internally unsettled by it in ways they struggle to explain without sounding rude or distant. Many of these individuals spent years forcing themselves to accept constant social access because society teaches that refusing visitors is impolite. They ignored their exhaustion to avoid disappointing others. They welcomed people even when they desperately needed silence. Over time, however, they began noticing how emotionally depleted they felt afterward. They realized that protecting their peace was not selfishness, but emotional survival. Little by little, they stopped apologizing for needing space. They started understanding that rest is not only physical, rest is also emotional, mental, and spiritual. There are people who walk into crowded rooms and immediately come alive. Conversation stimulates them. Noise energizes them. The presence of many personalities around them creates excitement instead of pressure. But there is another group of people who experience social interaction in a completely different way. For them, every conversation requires emotional energy, mental attention, and internal adjustment. Even when they enjoy the company of others, prolonged interaction slowly consumes their emotional reserves until they feel mentally exhausted. These are often the people who dislike having visitors, not because they hate human connection, but because social energy affects them more deeply than most people realize. Many emotionally sensitive individuals live with minds that never truly stop observing. During conversations, they are not only listening to words, they are analyzing facial expressions, voice changes, emotional tension, hidden meanings, and unspoken reactions. Their brain works continuously beneath the surface, collecting emotional information that others may never notice. While another person may casually enjoy a simple visit, the emotionally sensitive individual may already be processing dozens of invisible details at the same time. They wonder whether the guest feels comfortable, whether the atmosphere feels awkward, whether silence needs to be filled, whether they sound interested enough, or whether the other person secretly expects more emotional engagement than they can give. This constant emotional awareness creates invisible fatigue. It is the kind of exhaustion that cannot always be explained because nothing dramatic appears to happen externally. People see a normal conversation, laughter, food, and polite interaction. What they do not see is the silent mental effort happening underneath. The person hosting the visitors often feels responsible for carrying the emotional weight of the experience. They become the emotional manager of the room without even realizing it. They monitor moods, adjust their behavior, maintain politeness, and suppress their own tiredness to avoid seeming distant or rude. For many people who dislike visitors, social interaction feels similar to performing on a stage. Even in comfortable company, they rarely feel fully relaxed because part of their attention remains focused on maintaining the interaction. They cannot completely disconnect mentally while another person occupies their space. Their body may remain seated in the room, but internally, their nervous system stays alert. This is why many introverted or emotionally sensitive people experience relief the moment visitors leave. It is not because they suddenly dislike the guests. It is because their mind can finally stop performing emotional management. Some individuals are especially affected by forced conversations. Casual social traditions often require people to speak continuously even when there is nothing meaningful to say. Small talk becomes emotionally draining because it demands energy without providing emotional depth. These individuals usually prefer sincere conversations over endless surface-level interaction. They become tired when they feel pressured to entertain people with constant dialogue simply to avoid silence. In reality, silence does not frighten them. Artificial interaction does. The emotional exhaustion becomes even stronger when visitors stay longer than expected. At first, the individual may appear warm, engaged, and socially functional, but internally, their energy slowly declines minute by minute. The longer the interaction continues, the more mentally overloaded they become. Eventually, they begin craving solitude with almost physical intensity. They imagine the relief of silence, privacy, and emotional stillness. Sometimes they feel guilty for this reaction because society often teaches people that enjoying solitude too much is unhealthy or selfish. Yet for emotionally sensitive people, solitude is not rejection, it is recovery. Many of these individuals also struggle because they absorb emotional atmospheres very easily. If a visitor arrives carrying stress, negativity, tension, or emotional heaviness, the sensitive person often feels that energy deeply inside themselves. They may continue carrying those emotions long after the visitor leaves. This emotional absorption makes social interaction far more exhausting than outsiders understand. What others release quickly stays trapped inside the sensitive person's mind for hours or even days. Over time, these experiences teach them to protect their emotional capacity carefully. They begin limiting visits, avoiding unexpected company, and creating stronger personal boundaries around their space. Some people interpret this behavior as coldness or arrogance, but often it is simply self-preservation. These individuals understand how easily emotional overstimulation can disturb their peace, drain their focus, and disconnect them from themselves. They are not trying to escape people entirely. They are trying to protect the fragile balance between connection and emotional survival. Many people spend years living according to invisible social rules they never truly agreed with. They smile when they are emotionally exhausted. They say yes when every part of them wants to say no. They open their doors, answer calls, attend gatherings, and entertain conversations not because they genuinely desire those experiences, but because they fear appearing rude, distant, selfish, or difficult. Society quietly trains people to believe that constant availability is kindness, and that personal boundaries are signs of coldness. Over time, countless individuals begin sacrificing their emotional comfort simply to maintain the approval of others. But there comes a moment in certain people's lives when they become deeply tired of pretending. They begin noticing how much of their energy disappears through interactions that feel emotionally forced rather than meaningful. They realize they have spent too much time performing politeness while quietly abandoning their own emotional needs. These individuals start questioning why they must constantly participate in social rituals that leave them mentally empty. They begin understanding that authenticity matters more than obligation. People who dislike having visitors are often individuals who have reached that realization. They no longer feel willing to transform their personal space into a stage for artificial interaction. They do not enjoy conversations filled with forced laughter, repetitive questions, shallow politeness, or emotional performances designed only to satisfy social expectations. They crave sincerity, emotional honesty, and genuine connection. If interaction lacks depth, comfort, or authenticity, they would rather remain alone with their own thoughts than force themselves into participation. For these individuals, solitude often feels more truthful than social performance. When they are alone, they do not need to monitor every word they speak. They do not need to pretend interest they do not feel. They do not need to adjust their personality to match the emotional expectations of the people around them. They can simply exist without editing themselves constantly. That emotional freedom becomes incredibly valuable after years of suppressing their real feelings to make others comfortable. Many of them also become highly selective about who enters their personal space because they understand the emotional impact people can have. They no longer believe that every relationship deserves unlimited access to their time, energy, or home. Instead of measuring relationships by frequency of interaction, they measure them by emotional quality. One honest conversation with a sincere person means far more to them than hours of empty social activity. They are not searching for quantity in relationships. They are searching for emotional truth. This mindset often confuses people who equate hospitality with love. Some individuals believe that if someone refuses visitors or prefers distance, it automatically means they are angry, antisocial, or emotionally disconnected. But in many cases, the opposite is true. Emotionally authentic people tend to protect their energy precisely because they value emotional depth so strongly. They do not enjoy superficial exchanges because superficiality makes them feel disconnected from themselves. They would rather experience fewer interactions that feel real than many interactions that feel emotionally hollow. There is also a quiet courage in refusing social obligation. Many people continue tolerating emotionally draining situations simply to avoid judgment. But those who begin honoring their own emotional limits understand that constantly betraying themselves creates deep internal exhaustion. They realize that saying yes to everyone eventually means saying no to their own peace. Little by little, they stop apologizing for needing space. They stop inventing excuses for wanting solitude. They become more honest about what drains them and what restores them emotionally. This honesty often changes the way they view relationships completely. They no longer admire relationships built purely on habit, obligation, or social expectation. They begin valuing mutual understanding instead. Real connection, to them, means being accepted without performance. It means being around people who do not punish silence, who do not demand constant access, and who understand that needing space is not rejection. Mature relationships recognize that emotional boundaries are healthy, not hostile. For many of these individuals, the desire for fewer visitors is not about isolation, it is about emotional alignment. They want their external life to reflect their internal truth. They no longer wish to fill their homes with conversations that feel empty simply because society expects openness at all times. They choose peace over performance, honesty over obligation, and emotional authenticity over the exhausting need to appear endlessly available to everyone around them. There is a kind of silence that many people fear because it removes distraction and forces them to face their own thoughts. In a world filled with constant noise, endless notifications, crowded schedules, and continuous stimulation, silence has become rare. Most people move through life surrounded by conversations, entertainment, opinions, obligations, and digital interruption every single day. Their minds never fully stop absorbing information. Yet, there are certain individuals who deeply crave moments where nothing demands their attention. For them, silence is not emptiness. Silence is emotional oxygen. People who dislike having visitors are often individuals who depend on quiet environments to reconnect with themselves mentally and emotionally. They are not escaping life. They are trying to hear themselves clearly again after spending too much time surrounded by external pressure. Every interaction in the outside world pulls a small piece of attention away from the inner self. Responsibilities force people to focus outward constantly. They must solve problems, respond politely, adapt emotionally, and meet expectations. Over time, many individuals become so consumed by external demands that they slowly lose awareness of their own emotional condition. Silence allows these people to return inward. In quiet moments, they can finally process emotions they ignored during busy days. Thoughts that remained buried under stress begin surfacing naturally. Feelings that were pushed aside suddenly become visible. Their mind starts organizing confusion slowly, almost like muddy water becoming clear after remaining still. This is why solitude often feels healing to emotionally sensitive individuals. The absence of noise gives their inner world room to breathe. When visitors enter their space, that delicate process becomes interrupted immediately. Even if the guests are kind and respectful, the atmosphere changes completely. Attention shifts outward again. Conversation replaces reflection. Emotional awareness redirects toward another person's presence instead of inward observation. The quiet mental rhythm they were depending on disappears. What others experience as harmless company can feel like emotional interruption to someone who uses silence as a form of restoration. Many people underestimate how exhausting constant stimulation can become. The brain is not designed to remain emotionally active every waking moment without consequences. Yet modern life rarely provides true stillness. Even when people are physically alone, their minds remain flooded by phones, social media, entertainment, and digital noise. Those who intentionally protect silence understand something many others forget. Emotional clarity cannot exist in permanent distraction. For emotionally reflective individuals, silence becomes a space for self-conversation. During solitude, they examine their fears, regrets, memories, dreams, and emotional wounds without interference. They replay experiences, analyze relationships, and search for meaning in their lives. Some discover creativity in those moments, others discover emotional healing, many simply rediscover peace. The world outside often demands action constantly, but silence gives people permission to simply exist without pressure to perform, explain, or react. This is one reason some individuals become deeply protective of their private environment. Their home is not only a physical shelter, it is the emotional setting where silence can exist safely. They arrange their routines around that stillness because they know how necessary it is for their mental balance. A quiet room, soft lighting, familiar surroundings, and uninterrupted solitude can calm their nervous system in ways social interaction never could. Visitors, especially unexpected ones, can disrupt that emotional equilibrium instantly. There are also people who have spent much of their lives surrounded by emotional chaos. Some grew up in loud homes filled with tension, conflict, criticism, or unpredictability. Others experienced years of emotional pressure in relationships, workplaces, or social environments where they constantly felt observed or judged. Over time, silence became associated with safety. Quiet environments allowed them to lower emotional defenses they had carried for years. In peaceful solitude, they no longer feel emotionally threatened or overstimulated. Society often treats silence as something uncomfortable that must be filled immediately. People apologize for pauses in conversation. They turn on television simply to avoid hearing nothing. They assume that someone who spends too much time alone must secretly be unhappy. But emotionally aware, individuals often discover the opposite truth. They realize that constant noise can become a form of escape from self-awareness. Silence, while uncomfortable at first, eventually becomes a doorway toward emotional understanding. The individuals who prefer fewer visitors are often protecting that doorway carefully because they know how easily the outside world can drown out their inner voice once again. Many people who dislike having visitors were not born emotionally distant. In fact, a large number of them were once incredibly open, generous, welcoming, and emotionally available. They used to enjoy company. They used to believe that opening their doors to others would naturally create stronger bonds, deeper trust, and meaningful connection. Their homes were once places filled with conversation, laughter, and emotional openness. They listened carefully to people's problems, offered support without hesitation, and made themselves available whenever someone needed comfort or attention. But life has a way of changing people slowly through repeated emotional experiences. Over time, some individuals begin noticing a painful imbalance in their relationships. They realize they are constantly giving emotional energy without receiving the same level of understanding in return. They become the person others visit during difficult moments, yet few people truly notice when they themselves are emotionally exhausted. They offer kindness freely, but eventually discover that not everyone values access to another person's emotional world with the same respect. Little by little, disappointment begins shaping their boundaries. Certain experiences leave particularly deep emotional marks. Some people welcomed others into their private space only to face criticism afterward. Others discovered that conversations shared in trust became gossip outside the home. Some felt emotionally used by people who appeared only when they needed advice, comfort, money, attention, or temporary support. There are also individuals who constantly adjusted themselves to make visitors comfortable, only to realize their effort was taken for granted. These repeated experiences slowly teach emotionally sensitive people that unlimited openness can become dangerous when given to the wrong individuals. As disappointment accumulates, people begin reevaluating who deserves access to their time and personal environment. They stop seeing hospitality as an automatic obligation and start seeing it as something that must be earned through mutual respect. This transformation often surprises others because it can appear sudden from the outside. Someone who was once socially available becomes quieter, more selective, and protective of their personal space. But internally, that change usually develops over many years of emotional fatigue. People who have experienced emotional disappointment often develop a heightened awareness of how draining certain interactions can become. They no longer ignore the emotional consequences of allowing the wrong energy into their lives. They begin noticing how some visitors leave behind stress, negativity, criticism, emotional heaviness, or exhaustion long after the interaction ends. Their home no longer feels peaceful after certain people leave. Instead, it feels emotionally polluted, as though the atmosphere itself absorbed tension. Because of this awareness, they become extremely careful about protecting their peace. They start declining unnecessary visits. They limit access to their personal world. They choose silence over interactions that feel emotionally unsafe or emotionally one-sided. To outsiders, this behavior may look antisocial, but internally it is often the result of emotional wisdom learned through painful experience. They understand now that not everyone who enters a home enters with good emotional intentions. Many emotionally exhausted individuals also grow tired of relationships based entirely on convenience. They notice how some people disappear during difficult periods but suddenly return when they need emotional support, attention, or validation. Over time, these patterns become impossible to ignore. The individual begins realizing that constantly sacrificing personal peace for emotionally unbalanced relationships slowly destroys inner stability. Eventually, they stop allowing guilt to control their boundaries. There is also a deeper psychological shift that happens after repeated disappointment. People begin valuing peace more than approval. Earlier in life, they may have tolerated draining relationships simply to avoid conflict or rejection. But emotional pain teaches them that constantly betraying their own emotional needs leads to quiet resentment and exhaustion. They eventually understand that protecting inner peace is not selfishness, it is survival. This is why many individuals who dislike visitors become deeply selective about who enters their personal environment. They are not rejecting humanity completely, they are filtering emotional access carefully. Trust no longer comes automatically. Emotional closeness must now feel safe, sincere, and balanced. They pay close attention to how people make them feel emotionally rather than how charming or socially acceptable those people appear on the surface. Some people reach a point where silence feels safer than disappointment. Solitude feels lighter than emotional obligation. A peaceful evening alone feels healthier than hours spent entertaining people who drain their spirit. They no longer romanticize constant social interaction because experience has shown them that company does not always create comfort. Sometimes the wrong presence creates deeper exhaustion than isolation ever could. One of the rarest abilities a person can develop is the ability to genuinely enjoy being alone. Most people spend their lives trying to escape silence because silence forces them to confront themselves. They keep televisions running in empty rooms, scroll endlessly through their phones, surround themselves with constant conversations, or seek distraction every moment they are awake. Many individuals fear solitude because they secretly fear what may surface when external noise disappears. thoughts become louder, unresolved emotions appear. Questions without answers begin demanding attention. For this reason, countless people depend on constant company, not because they truly enjoy connection, but because they cannot comfortably exist in their own presence for very long. But there is another kind of person entirely. These individuals discover something powerful in solitude. Instead of experiencing emptiness when they are alone, they experience freedom. Their own company becomes peaceful rather than uncomfortable. They learn how to exist without needing constant stimulation, validation, or emotional distraction from others. This is often why people who dislike having visitors become deeply attached to their personal space. They are not lonely inside their solitude. They are emotionally at ease there. For these individuals, being alone creates a rare sense of emotional independence. They are free from social pressure, judgment, expectations, and performance. No one demands conversation from them. No one interrupts their thoughts. No one expects them to entertain, explain themselves, or emotionally manage the atmosphere around them. In solitude, their energy belongs completely to them again. That feeling becomes incredibly valuable after spending large portions of life adapting constantly to the emotional needs of other people. Many of these individuals develop rich inner worlds that outsiders rarely notice. While others depend heavily on external activity for stimulation, they often find fulfillment in reflection, creativity, reading, learning, observing, or simply thinking deeply about life. Silence does not bore them because their mind remains active internally. Their thoughts become companionship. Their imagination becomes movement. Their private routines become comforting rituals rather than signs of isolation. This emotional self-sufficiency often confuses highly social people. Society tends to associate happiness with crowds, parties, frequent visitors, and nonstop interaction. Someone who spends too much time alone is often viewed with suspicion or pity. People immediately assume loneliness, sadness, or emotional problems must exist behind the solitude. But emotionally independent individuals understand that peace and happiness do not always require constant social presence. In fact, they often feel emotionally healthier when they have enough distance from excessive interaction. Over time, these people begin realizing that not all company improves emotional well-being. Some interactions create pressure instead of comfort. Some relationships demand energy without offering peace in return. Once individuals discover how calm and emotionally stable they feel in solitude, they become far less willing to sacrifice that balance for unnecessary social obligation. They stop confusing noise with connection. They stop believing that being surrounded by people automatically creates emotional fulfillment. There is also a quiet confidence that develops in people who enjoy their own company. They no longer depend heavily on external approval to feel complete. They learn how to comfort themselves emotionally instead of constantly searching for reassurance from others. They become less desperate for attention because they no longer fear being alone with their own thoughts. This emotional independence gives them a kind of inner stability many people spend years searching for unsuccessfully. For some individuals, solitude also becomes a place where identity finally feels clear. Around other people, many individuals unconsciously adapt their personality to fit expectations. They soften opinions, hide emotions, adjust behavior, or perform socially acceptable versions of themselves. But in solitude, there is no audience to impress. No role needs to be played. The individual can reconnect with their genuine personality without interference. That authenticity becomes deeply addictive because it feels emotionally honest. This is one reason frequent visitors can feel emotionally disruptive to people who treasure solitude. The presence of others immediately changes the emotional environment. Attention shifts outward. Personal rhythm becomes interrupted. Mental stillness disappears. Even enjoyable company can feel draining simply because it pulls the individual away from the inner peace they worked hard to create within themselves. Many of these people eventually reach a profound realization that transforms how they view life completely. They understand that learning to enjoy your own company is a form of freedom very few people ever achieve. When a person no longer fears solitude, they stop accepting relationships, environments, or social obligations that damage their peace simply to avoid being alone. They become far more selective about where they invest emotional energy because they already possess something many others continue chasing endlessly: comfort within themselves.